because Rob Wittman coming up, Congressman, 1st District Republican. Congressman, great to have you with us. Boy, a lot going on. Never a dull moment. Now you guys are back in session. A budget battle coming up, shutdown looming. Give us an update.
Well, John, a lot of different moving parts. I've been in conversations yesterday with the leadership on our Republican Study Committee that's given to the leadership, I think, a great plan about how to temporarily fund the government to take on this issue with Planned Parenthood, these barbaric actions that these folks are taking there, and the trafficking of human tissues there from these fetuses. It is unbelievable what they are doing, and to somehow guise this as though it is just about health services for women is denying the reality of what's going on there and the barbarism of that. So that absolutely has to be addressed. We've begun some of that process yesterday and today by taking up some legislation to make sure that in the long term we are fundamentally changing what the United States government does in funding this. And money is fungible, so somehow to say that they don't spend federal dollars on abortions is not, I think, correct, because the money that's sent to them, we know, goes into accounts, and those monies are spread throughout Planned Parenthood. And I would urge anybody that looks at this, that questions whether this should be an issue that's brought up, all they have to do is to look at these videos, and they are deeply, deeply disturbing. And I think it's correct that this does cut to the heart and soul of who we are as a nation. So this issue must be addressed. Now, that being said, I think we need to have a plan to say, what do we do with this? Because we understand that when it gets to the president, it'll be vetoed. There won't be the votes to override the veto. Another issue, too, John, that absolutely has to be taken up, and as part of this whole discussion is the archaic practices in the Senate. When you have something this important that needs to be taken up, this ridiculous filibuster rule that allows a minority to block the majority when you have to get something done is beyond me. I think the filibuster rule in the Senate needs to be taken away. It was put in place back in the mid-'70s, and I know there's a number of us up here, and the efforts being spearheaded by Congressman Morgan Griffith to get rid of that filibuster rule so that we can actually get those things done. I mean, the House can do its job, send a bill over to the Senate, and then it goes nowhere in the Senate. So, and remember, they can vote just like they did on bringing up the Iran nuclear deal. They can vote not even to discuss it. And, when you have these important issues like the Iran nuclear deal, and now with fundamentally what are we going to do as a government in funding an organization like Planned Parenthood and the barbaric practices that they're undertaking with the marketing of human tissues there, that has to be a discussion that the Senate takes up. These archaic rules don't allow it to happen. But the House has to do its job. We have been pushing leadership to make sure that there are provisions within a funding bill, or at least a CR, to address this particular issue. Whatever happens with the CRs, and I absolutely hate CRs. I think they're an abdication of our responsibility. And, John, I've been a proponent all along to make sure we get our job done, not go home in August. This ridiculousness of leaving all this to the end, puts us in these types of positions. But that being said, that work needs to be done well beforehand, before we get to these crisis points like we are right now. And this is only putting off in the short term what has to be done in the long term. Is we have to address the long-term spending issues here with our nation. So, a continuing resolution just leads us temporarily through this. And in another element too, for those folks that say, you Republicans, all you want to do is to shut down the government. None of us want to shut down the government. I think that there's a way we can go about this and not shut the government down. I mean, I went through it the last time we were shut down for 16 days. I have tens of thousands of federal employees in my district. The last thing we want to do is to shut the government down. We know a lot of those employees work at places like the Pentagon. They do critical work for the nation. So, we don't want to be affecting them, yet we do have, I think, an obligation to address these issues that I think are extraordinarily important, and that people look for us to stand for what is right. And I do think it cuts to the character of our nation if we are not going to stand against organizations like Planned Parenthood that are in this marketing of human tissues.
Well, I have to tell you, Congressman Wittman, you hit on all the big issues, and we appreciate that. You're spot on today. I want to get to this filibuster rule, and then we'll come back to Planned Parenthood and the government shutdown and what the Democrats are trying to do. In the debate and the undercard debate yesterday, this was brought up by Bobby Jindal to Senator Graham, and I couldn't believe my eyes because I'm in Simi Valley. I was there live when Graham basically said, look, we're not going to abandon the 60-vote cloture filibuster rule because, look, if we're back in the minority, that's the only defense that we have. And Jindal said to him, well, maybe that's the reason you're going to end up in the minority. I mean, it was unconscionable to me that these 55 Republican senators, all they have to do under McConnell is basically have a vote within their own committee, and it's called the nuclear option. That's the word. But basically, this 60-vote thing, Congressman, is not part of the Constitution. It's simply a made-up rule. Why don't they just get rid of that so then all this stuff could be debated?
Well, John, they should. They should go back to the rule prior to that time. I think most people have seen the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That's what a filibuster is meant to be, for an individual to have to get up and talk about the issues. This 60-vote provision allows them not to have to do that. They can just, a minority of folks can say, no, we're not even going to talk about it. You need to go back and say, listen, if you're going to filibuster, you can't come up and just vote as a minority and say, no, we're not going to discuss this. You have to go to the floor, and you have to take that time in order to filibuster. That's the way the rule was originally designed. It was changed in the 70s. It needs to be changed back so that we get to the function of government. And I would adamantly disagree with Senator Graham. I don't think that the Senate functions properly, nor do I think our founding fathers had in mind for the body to function that way, for just by a simple vote to do that. And another archaic element of that, John, is this idea that a single senator can put a hold on a bill. And in many instances, you can't even figure out who's put the hold on the bill. So you got something there that you need to get through the Senate, and it's not going anywhere, and you go, why? And they go, well, there's been a hold placed on it. You go, well, by who? And then you can't even know who put the hold on it. I mean, that is not transparent, open government the way our founding fathers had in mind, nor is it a properly functioning way for a body to operate. I mean, our legislative bodies operate on the premise of open debate about these issues. And if you want to filibuster, that's fine, but then go to the floor and talk about the bill and stay there for as long as you believe that you need to in order to make your point, or to delay consideration of the bill because you want to make sure that these different ideas are portrayed. That's the way it was designed, not for an arbitrary effort by the minority to say, hey, we're just going to stop this. I mean, I think people expect our members of the legislature to go on the record whether they agree or disagree with this. And, I think we've seen recently here with the Iran nuclear deal, something as important as that, why there has not been a formal vote in the Senate, I think is beyond anybody's comprehension about how that happened and why it's a properly functioning body without having a vote on that.
Absolutely. And look, if anybody wants to know why Donald Trump continues to lead in the polls in this primary, it's because of the nonsense that people see going on in the Senate with the stupid rule that we can't seem to get rid of, that nobody has the moxie to just end. And as you said, Congressman Wittman, it's unbelievable that senators can basically hide behind things. They don't have to debate it. They stop it. We don't even know who it is. I mean, that is not the way the founding fathers set this up. Now, let's get to the budget. President Obama and Democratic leaders in Congress, they're saying they just want to pass a clean, they got all the buzzwords down. They want to pass a clean stopgap bill to avert a government shutdown and allow negotiators additional time to reach a long-term budget deal. Those are all code words basically for Republicans do whatever the Democrats want. So how do you guys maneuver yourselves through what Obama and the Democrats are trying to do? And it's kind of frustrating when we're going to get another, quote, stopgap bill.
Well, that's it. And, it's not just the stopgap bill and making sure we address the necessary issues there, but it's what do you do in the longer term? John and I've spoken about this before, it's not just the issue of Planned Parenthood, but it's the issue of what do we do to make sure we're properly funding our military? If we continue down the road, the sequester looms, and then these CRs fund at current levels. They don't allow any of the decisions that need to be made by our military to be done. It's an inefficient way to go about it. You actually waste more money by these temporary funding measures than what you save. So we have got to do that. And again, you hear the other side saying the only way we're going to agree to make sure we properly fund our military is to spend additional money elsewhere. And that just adds to the deficit, adds to the debt, and that's not a place where I think or where anybody believes that we ought to be. So it actually turns into a bigger issue. And I believe that the House has an obligation to put forward a bill that reflects what we are hearing from constituents across the nation. And many of these things are bipartisan issues, and that leads us into some other issues, John. We have looming right down the road in the next month the debt ceiling. And if you're going to address the debt ceiling, you have to have a responsible mechanism by which to reduce the deficit and therefore the debt. You can't keep going down the road of borrowing more money without any plan as to how to reduce that deficit. So that leads us into that. That's another issue that I think should at least be basically discussed as we talk about this stopgap funding measure, better known as a CR. And again, CRs themselves are very problematic because they are not an efficient way to make sure our government operations continue. So, there's so many different elements of this, but this is the beginning of a long course about how do we get our arms around both the policy issues that need to be put forward in these appropriations documents, and how do we get this nation on track to a managed path to address the deficit, to reduce the deficit to zero, and therefore to address the debt.
It's crazy, no question about it. We're going to get another debt ceiling increase. There's no end in sight. Nobody wants to solve it. I mean, it's very frustrating, Congressman Wittman. Congressman Wittman, Syrian refugees overrunning Europe, many of them male, which is disturbing people. Like, why aren't they back fighting for their homeland like they should be, these young males trying to get out of there? But now we got Obama saying, look, we're going to take 10,000 in. You've got colleagues in the House of Representatives across the aisle saying, well, 10,000 isn't enough. We need 100,000. We're broke. We have a $20 trillion debt, $130 trillion of unfunded mandates. Right now, the new census data, Congressman Wittman, shows that 90% of people that come to the country illegally, that are illegal aliens or whatever you want to call them, are on some kind of government assistance. Plus, now you've got a huge security issue. How do we know who these 10,000 people are? How do we know that ISIS hasn't penetrated them? How do we know they're not moles? Why would we be allowing 10,000, 100,000 of these refugees in with all these security that go with it, when countries right there are saying no, like Kuwait, Qatar, the Saudis, Arab Emirates, Dubai, all of them saying no. We're like the patsies of the globe. What's up with this?
Well, John, as you know, first, the root of this is a failure in the policy to address these issues sometime back in both Syria and Iraq. And here we are now having to deal with that. And I couldn't agree with you more. There is security issues with those individuals coming to the United States. ISIS, I know, will look at this as an avenue to be able to bring more terrorists to our shores. As you said, these are refugees. They're going to come here. They're going to require support from the United States. The nations in that region have not stepped up. I do want to give credit, though, to Jordan. I did visit Jordan, and Jordan has taken on a number of these Syrian refugees, almost to the point of crippling that country's budget. So they've done the job. But as you said, why aren't other Arab nations standing up? Why aren't they taking folks in from their neighborhood? Why is it expected that European countries have now proposed refugees coming here to the United States? The United States ought to be putting pressure on these other Arab nations to say, hey, these refugees need to be coming to your countries. That's where I believe that they can have the closest association with a path to go back to those nations, hopefully after after order is restored and ISIS is defeated. It just doesn't make sense, from, as you said, from a security standpoint, from a refugee policy standpoint, and we need to be sympathetic to their plight and what they're leaving from. But remember, much of that was caused by a failure of policy here in addressing the security issues there, and the lack of resolve by the United States to say, what are Arab nations in the neighborhood doing? We need to be putting pressure on them to say, by the way, you need to be taking these individuals on. And I haven't heard of any plan or anybody talk about the consideration of bringing these refugees to the United States and what would be done, first of all, to take up the impact on the states, because remember, a lot of these programs where these individuals would need to be helped fall upon the states. How is that going to be addressed? How are we going to assure that there aren't folks coming in here that have that are associated with terrorist activities or want to perpetrate terrorism here in the United States? None of that has been said. It's all like, let's just go ahead and take them in. And you already see the European nations, many of them saying, whoa, wait a minute, this is more than what we can handle. They're starting to see the negative impacts. We ought to be able to look and see what's happening in Europe and go, whoa, wait a minute, they're right. We can't just look at this without understanding all these other impacts before we make any kind of commitments to bring any of those refugees in the United States, in addition to making sure the Arab countries are doing their part.
Congressman, you're absolutely spot on, and I appreciate your taking that position. And I think that, look, you nailed it. Until these other Arab countries, many of which are very rich, I mean, you take one, Kuwait, right? We went in there, our blood, we bailed them out, we liberated them, and they're not taking these refugees, and they expect us to do that. I mean, it's just and the other thing, and I know we're out of time, is you look at these pictures, Congressman Wittman, and you see so many of these refugees are young, healthy males, and you say to yourself, we got Lindsey Graham saying we should send 20,000 Americans in to fight ISIS. Our blood, our money, our limbs, our suffering, and you've got these Syrian refugees, males, running away, trying to come into the United States to have an ice cream. I mean, it's unfathomable to people.
It is. It just doesn't make any sense on any level to see that happening, and then for the expectation to be that our young men and women are going to go there and fight the battles there against this barbaric, treacherous terrorist group of ISIS. I mean, and then, John, on top of that, the training program that we put in place, spent over $50 million on, and now have 5 fighters left of that program of moderate Syrian forces. You know, you read about those things and you see what's happening with the proposal to bring those refugees in, and you just shake your head and you go, what? What are they talking about?
Enough.
Yeah.
America's had enough. We're out of time. I want to thank Rob Wittman for being with us. More info, whitman.house.gov. Sign up for his newsletter, whitman.house.gov. I'm out of time.